Thank you. It is very interesting. I'm the end of the baby boom generation, and I think for a lot of us, we live to work. Now this younger generation works to live. So it's a different mindset. I want to thank the panel. Assemblymember Joan Sawyer. Weber, I'm sorry, Dr. Weber.
I simply wanted to, our good friend Joan Sawyer is here with us now. I want to, first of all, apologize. I've been in too many meetings today, so they're all overlapping, and I've got to get back to more budget hearings and items such as that. And so this is an important panel that was on my calendar, but it got trumped by all the other things that we're trying to do right now. So I'm grateful that I got here for a part of it. It is an important discussion, and I think it's one that has to be, that we've had brief conversations with in our caucus recently, the Democratic caucus particularly. We've had some conversations in general in terms of law enforcement and public safety and those kinds of issues. And obviously the national scene has heightened the awareness of the challenges we face in all communities in the state of California. And I know that the number of applicants, as you've pointed out, is dwindling. It has been for years, going down. And I know that as I ask young people about going into the police department, I don't seem to get a bite from anybody that says, yes, I want to be a police officer. It's not one of the professions, even though we know we need police officers and firefighters and those kinds of things in our communities, but it doesn't seem to generate the same level of, that's something I want to do. And so I've asked, I try to talk to young people quite often. They're in and out of my home, and to find out what the issues are, particularly given the current climate that we're in, and where are we going in terms of policing and law enforcement, and what's happening not only in California, but what's happening across the nation, and what must we do. More recently, the police officers from my community were in my office, and we were talking about the issue of relationships that some of you have talked about. And I pointed out to them that, the ones in my office I all know personally, so I don't have a problem with them, obviously. But we talked about that issue, and I said, I think part of the issue is that you need to recruit people who don't want to be cops. You need to go out and recruit people who don't want to be police officers, because the image that comes across as to who wants to be a police officer, oftentimes the issues that we sometimes get involved in, that we see out in the public, that 1% that's causing everybody grief and headache, and often are those who have issues of authority, issues who want control, issues who want to be, and which they admitted themselves that there are some folks who are cops at work, at church, at home, in their relationships, everywhere. So it's this authority issue that's there, which when you take something like the police force and you recognize that they have a tremendous amount of authority, you also have to have a person who can handle authority without it becoming them or becoming out of control. So there's a unique challenge you have in trying to find that actual niche, that's there. That's why we say you're recruiting from the military. I'm thinking to myself, I read something that the president said we need to have fewer warriors and more caretakers or something of that nature. Yeah, we guardians of the public rather than warriors. And so if you're getting from that population, we may end up still in this warrior mentality versus those who are really caretakers of communities and who have that kind of relationship that's there that ought to be a part of it. So you have a real recruitment issue in terms of the image and trying to change the perception of who becomes a police officer. And often, and I told them, I said, go pick some people who don't want to be cops, who tell you, no, I don't want to be one of those, because they may be good for you because of the fact that they don't want to be there, may mean that they may do a different level of service that really changes the image, not only for those in the services, but in the community. I even like to have elected officials who don't want to be elected officials, because very honestly, they do very different things. I didn't want to come here. I was recruited like crazy. I didn't want to come here. But there's some people who've been planning to come here their whole life, okay? And seriously. And that can be a problem. That can be a problem. We know that. And so sometimes you have to look for that other person, that other spirit that provides a balance for us in terms of that. Clearly, we're in a crisis situation, and as I said, when I ask young people what's going on, why don't they want to be police officers, they have a perception that if they join the academy, it will change who they are, that they'll be less of the person that they started with, because they believe that there's a psychology or mentality in the police force. And it's something that you have to deal with that changes, that transforms this person into basically becoming a police officer. And they don't want to change their mentality. And I don't necessarily believe that has to be true, because I do know people who don't have what they think is this authority mentality that's there. But I know some people who I've met who have it, okay? So the question then is, what happens in the process? The other thing I always ask myself when we deal with the issues of diversity, what do we expect when we get diversity? Okay? And that's important to me. It's important to me here, it's important to me in schools, and important to me in communities. And what I mean by that, oftentimes I've been in a city where we argued for more gender in our leadership. And we ended up with a council that was majority women and majority people of color. And they made the same decisions that the men made, who in people's mind did not run the city with any level of sensitivity. So it was no advantage to have these women. They made no more discussions about child care and things that need to be representative of women. They had no more friendlier policy concerning businesses and the inclusion of individuals. So what was the point of having these people who changed faces and gender, but the policies were the same? So when we ask ourselves about diversity, I always want to ask you, and you don't have to answer today, as you look forward, what do you want out of diversity? What would a police force look like in the state of California that honored diversity in gender and in race and all those other kinds of things? What would it look like, and what would we expect to get from it, other than have people who look like us? I mean, we can see with the situation in Baltimore that it was a very diverse group of people who did whatever that was done, or who allegedly did what was done. So what would we have seen differently if it had been truly a diverse force that was diverse in terms of its mentality, how it looked at people, who it stopped, who it didn't stop, how it handled people, a level of sensitivity about pain that would have existed if there had been a different kind of diverse population. So when you start talking diversity, I hope that we talk about it more than just in shifting the colors and the numbers on the pieces of on the paper, but really talk about a diverse way of thinking. When I always tell people, when I enter a room, I enter with all of me in policy, which means I enter as a woman, I enter as an African American, I enter as a person who was poor, I enter as a person who struggled through the system and went all the way to the top academically. I enter as a person who still lives in the inner city. Because when I look at a decision, I want all of those people on that decision. I want that sensitivity as a mother. I want that sensitivity as a person who lives in the inner city. I want the sensitivity as a person who knows what it is to be born poor and struggle to get to a place and know the challenges as well as the opportunities. All of those have to be there. I don't want to shield any of those. I don't want to throw any of those away and just become the legislator sitting here in Sacramento as if I have no past, no texture to my being. And so when you look at that and you say to yourself, what do I want from my diverse workforce? What do I want from my diverse police officers? Hopefully in your academies you'll start thinking about, what does that mean? What does it look like? What kind of decisions would be made? What kind of activities would we engage in if we really honored the diversity rather than simply recruiting those individuals? Because if we do, we may find ourselves maybe in a better place for recruitment. Maybe those persons will see themselves in the operation even before they get into the operation. Because the way the operation operates, that's still effective, that's still going to provide safety and security for its population, but becomes a different kind of force because of what happens in the process of recruitment, but also in terms of the institution itself. Most of us want diversity without any change, and that's only natural. We want, I've been in boards and commissions and things where we bring in people of color, but we don't want diverse points of view. We want the people in the room to act like everybody that's already in the room. And that can make people who come in not want to be in the room or not want to be there. So I just challenge you as you talk about diversity that you ask yourselves just a critical question. What does a diverse police force look like? What kind of decisions would we make? What kind of environment would be created? What's our expectations more than just changing the gender and the color of people in the room, but basically creating a diverse workforce that still provides the same level of quality of service and care and those kinds of things. Because I think if we ever get there in our conversation and in our vision and our view and our activities, the recruitment of others will be a little bit easier. But thank you for coming. I appreciate it, having you here.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. We're just joined by Assemblyman Joan Sawyer. Like to make any comments?
Yes, I'd like to make a few comments, and I'll be very brief. You know, as chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, this has become a number one priority for us. And what has been interesting, and I'll just pick up on this one point about diversity of ideas, being able to talk honestly with one another, to look at ourselves critically about where we are, but most important, where we want to go into the future. And we can talk about body cameras and the court system. We can get into those. But the reason that I'm here now, why I got on this committee, because I still believe that change is going to have to come from within the ranks of the rank and file at the end of the day. You're going to have to change the way you police in ways that during the 60s, it was dogs and fire hoses and a whole bunch of other atrocities that were done. That was standard policing policy. And then you evolved. Policing evolved and you got better. But I think it was because of that struggle between people having this dialogue was the best way to proceed. And within the Black Caucus, what's been great is we do have these same kind of debates. And we kind of side on more or less to the left. You know, we need to do this. We need to have this kind of regulation. And it's always interesting, which I find actually I enjoy. You'll see one or two hands go up, or 2 or 3 members will call me and say, you know what, I used to be a police officer in the local police department. I'm a reserve sheriff. Or I've had 25 years in the sheriff department. I see things just a little different than what you're looking at. And I think that's very, very, very healthy. In fact, I think if we come together more in the Black Caucus and come up with ideas, we may ultimately come up with solutions, because now we're interacting with actual public safety professionals to come up with remedies for what is going on. We need to have this kind of interaction, because at the end of the day, as you probably have now figured out, unlike Dr. Weber, I wanted to be an elected official because I thought the ones that I worked for in the city of L.A., I could have done a damn much better job than they could. And so I'm sitting there going, oh, wait a minute, I need to get elected to fix this stuff. And you don't want elected officials telling you what to do. And if you don't want that to happen, then you got to clean up your own house. The reason we jump in, the reason we have these laws that you sit back and go, why are you doing this? Because you're not helping. And if you leave us up, just like your kids, you leave them up to their own devices, you see what you're going to get. And so I implore you to use this committee and other places, examples, to come up with ideas. And I'll just leave you with this. Even with body cameras, even just the idea of looking at the video before or after. If you stand back and say, the public, forget about us elected officials, the public is concerned that the 1% might compromise that video so that they can get away with murder. Not get away with something wrong, but literally get away with murder. And so when you come back to us and say, you know what, we can make the video, we can make our reports better. What we hear, the public, they hear, oh, you plan to cheat on a test because you got a chance to look at the answers beforehand, and you plan to cheat to make it better. And so I'm going to push it back to you to say, how do you keep that 1% from compromising something that might be a very good idea, which is body cameras? How do you plan to protect, as a chief of the department, how do you plan to ensure that you get accurate information, and you can use this as a tool for training, you can use this as a way to weed out the 1%? Tell us. If you remain silent and just say no, then we can't move. We can't even dialogue if you're not giving us some response. And so what I'm imploring you to do, as we come up with these ideas, I would recommend you come up with the ideas of how to change and put some legislation in to make the system better so that you can get rid of the 1% that is damaging your whole profession. And I think you'll get a better response, not only just from us, but most importantly, the public. There's a huge image problem right now. And the best way to do that is to be proactive in making changes. And so, again, I want to thank Assemblymember Cooper for bringing you here so we can continue this dialogue. Because I think it's ultimately, at the end of the day, that's how we're going to come up with the best answers. And the last thing I will tell you, the best answers I've gotten, I've said this in other committees, have come from law enforcement, especially African American law enforcement. So this whole issue of diversity is really great. And the corrections department, I've met with African American correctional officers who have said we have to change the culture of how we police and the culture of how we incarcerate. We've got to get away from lock them up and throw away the key. We've got to come up with a more holistic way of dealing with it so these guys don't come back. How do we ensure that they don't come back? And if it means changing the way you're trained, if it means then going back again to your culture, and you have officers that think beyond kind of the Dirty Harry kind of approach, and get into that kinder, gentler officer, or at least that, I like to say that smarter, brighter officer, then let's get to that, and let's get to that pretty quick. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting this together.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. There's some great comments from my colleagues, and I think as elected officials, we do have some culpability in this. And that's the bottom line. And you think about it, I was out there buying drugs undercover 30 years ago in the same area.
As a part of your job.
As part of my job, yes. That's a heavy statement. That area was bad 30 years ago. It was bad 40, 50 years ago. I drive out there today. It's part of my district. The same stuff is going on. And what do they have? They have horrible schools, low-performing schools. They have no banks, no supermarkets, no arts, no activities for the kids. That's a big problem, and we're there every day because that's where the crime is. We aren't in the rich areas or the good areas of Sacramento. We're in the poor areas as an occupying force. And that's horrible, and that's the problem. We have got to change that. That's the key. We can do all these things, body cameras and all this great stuff, but until we change that, and they put a lot of money in redevelopment for Arco Arena and business, but what have we done for our communities to put money down there to change those things? And that's really the key to that. That's sad. No kid wants to grow up. And what's funny is I've got a program right at 5 o'clock. One of my schools in my district is the most impoverished. Everybody gets free lunch, free breakfast, and some get free dinner. And we're serving them meals tonight. But as the crow flies, 3 miles from my house. And in my city, largest Cal Ripken baseball league west of the Mississippi, largest youth soccer registration in the country, 6,000 kids playing youth soccer. If those kids 3 miles away had the same opportunity, their lives would be dramatically different. So that's kind of my mantra with us as electeds. That's the stuff we got to change. Law enforcement's a part of it, yeah. We need to take care of our own and take care of some of those issues. But on a bigger issue at the 30,000-foot level, these same areas, wherever you live at, it's been the same forever. That is unacceptable. That's a big part of the problem. And I think if we start there, like I said, no kid aspires to be a crook or a bad guy or go to jail. And that's what we've got to change and invest in those communities. We save a lot of money then in law enforcement, Health and Human Services, the DA's office, just millions of dollars. And that's where it starts at. We've got to work and invest in our communities, and we really don't. I don't care where you're from in California, your underserved places have been that way forever. And that's unfortunate. That is very sad. I know Mr. Gallagher just joined us. You want to make any comments?
Well, just a few comments is, first of all, I want to thank you for asking me to be part of this committee. What I would like to do with this is just do a lot of listening. Because I think one thing is there's certainly been a lot of noise lately on all of these issues. And I think we need to take some time to really vet out what's going on. What are the contributing factors to what we're seeing in different communities? What things maybe need to change, but, I think like the chairman stated, what's maybe the bigger picture issues that are going on that maybe need to be addressed as well. And I think part of what we need to do, and part of maybe what this committee can do, is sort of step away from the noise for a little bit and really listen to our law enforcement, listen to our communities, and try and really decipher the truths. And I think that's a big part of what we do as legislators is really try to get at the truth. And the more we can do that and not just knee-jerk respond to things, I think the better policies will be made, and will also better impact our own communities. But what I really like to do with this committee is really just try to listen, and I think this provides an opportunity for us to hear from all of the people who are involved in these issues, from law enforcement officials, from the communities themselves, and listen to all those perspectives. I agree with what my colleague said, is that just because of the way someone looks doesn't mean they're going to offer a different perspective. There needs to be room for different perspectives and to really listen and discern the truth of what's going on with these different issues, and they're important. So I think it's good that we're taking the time, and I think this can be a real forum where we do take the time and listen and discern, what those things are. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank the panel members. We're a little behind, so I'm going to call the next panel. Our second topic of discussion today is on communities and law enforcement's engaged in integrated partnerships, specifically implementing and sustaining programs that work to strengthen trust. Over my 30-year law enforcement career and my time as a city council member, I've been involved in many community and law enforcement-based programs. Some of these programs are designed to reduce crime, some to educate law enforcement so they understand the needs of specific communities, some to train citizens on how to protect themselves, and even some to repair the damaged relationships between a community and law enforcement agency. Regardless of the goal, the basic premise of integrating our law enforcement agencies into various communities they serve is paramount. Our communities getting to know our cops and our cops understanding the needs of each neighborhood is the most important factor in restoring, strengthening, and maintaining trust. With that, I would now like to welcome any committee members. We've got our comments already, excuse me. So our first panel of experts up are Chauncey Smith, the racial justice advocate for the American Civil Liberties Union, and Edwin Perez, a legislative advocate for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and Jeanette, I'll let Jeanette pronounce that.
Sunny Patin.
Legislative staff attorney for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. I don't want to mess your name up, so I apologize. Welcome.
Greetings, Chairman and members of the committee. I just want to start off by echoing some of your comments that you made, Assemblymember Cooper, in regards to just providing resources for kids in our community to really sharpen some skills or develop some skills, because as of right now, there isn't much in the community for kids to do. And sometimes when that happens, when there's a lack of resources or a lack of place for our children to go, they kind of just do what everybody else is doing, which in my case, in my experiences, was not so great things. Some of it involving violence, drugs, etc. Also, what's really important, and I think we need to keep in mind, is just exposure. If these kids knew better, they would do better. And also, if they were exposed to a lot more things, they would know about the opportunities that are out there. I mean, asking a small kid in first grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? Coming from my neighborhood, it's kind of like an unfair question, because you don't even really know that many things besides, all right, what you see on a daily basis, the illegal activities, but even the blue collar jobs, construction worker or a nurse or what have you. You really you don't know really what's out there. So really exposing these kids and getting them involved in things that they're not really used to seeing, you'd be surprised at how far they could go, and what kind of mindset that they'll develop once you actually put them in a place to where they can excel. And they really don't know what they can excel at until you give them a broad range of things to show them. And so I just want to actually kind of give a little story. Growing up in my community, there was a place called Rebounds. It was a basketball facility that we all went to. Really loved going there. It was definitely better than outdoors. But, for whatever reason, the owner, he wanted to make some more money. And so he wasn't really making money by us kids come in there and playing ball. You would make money by, hosting tournaments or whatever. And they're also charging like a lot for people to come in and play. And so for us, that was really like our only resource. Like we was like, all right, well, let's go play ball over there. But once that happened, it was like we really didn't have anywhere to go. It was like, what do we do? And that's goes back to what I was saying before. You kind of just fall into doing what everybody else is doing. I mean, we don't have any money. That's what we really love to do. And then once that's taken away from us, bad things happen. And so, I just wanted to echo, like I said, what you said, and I'll pass it along to Chauncey.
I'd like to second all the comments just made by Edwin. We've been working closely together on law enforcement, community relations, policy issues the past few months. Definitely appreciate that. My name is Chauncey Smith, as mentioned before. I'm a racial justice advocate with the ACLU of California. The ACLU of California has over 100,000 members and supporters throughout the state, and our principal mission is to defend civil liberties and further their advancement. With that being said, I'd like to let everyone in the committee know that I come from a family of law enforcement. My father's a police officer in Los Angeles, and he's been in that role for over 30 years. So with that being said, it has made me a person who deeply understands the commitment that they undertake and the risks that they, putting their life on the line on an everyday basis. And I think it's an honorable profession. However, at the same time, I think it's necessary to recognize some hard truths about our reality when it comes to law enforcement and community relations. Americans now routinely see people of color unjustifiably killed by law enforcement on a daily basis. Officers partially severed Freddie Gray's spine while he was handcuffed and in custody. Walter Scott was shot in his back and head 5 times. He was running for safety. And as Eric Gardner repeatedly pled for air, officers strangled him until his body lay listless. Whether it be Maryland, South Carolina, New York, or our home state of California, these lapses of justice have become all too familiar. Indeed, it seems as if our system of public safety now produces fixed results which dictate that black and brown males must die regardless of what they do. While it is quite difficult to discern betterment in such tragedy, if it exists, it may be that it has delivered a proverbial gut check to our society. Americans across the ideological spectrum are no longer casting a blind eye towards racially biased policing. Many have instead been forced to deeply wrestle with the rules in place and the unsettling degree to which they reveal that lives of color may be less valued despite immense progress since our nation's founding. Given this moment and these incidents and the fact that our society's attention has been captured, I think it's important for the committee and the legislature more broadly to consider 2 key policy reforms to building public trust in law enforcement and improving law enforcement community relations. One key issue is addressing the problem of racial and identity profiling. The other is responding to excessive uses of force that are reflected in the examples that I mentioned prior. In regards to racial profiling, communities of color, everyday people of color, and other identity characteristics feel as though they're being targeted by law enforcement because they're disproportionately stopped. And studies show that across races, people tend to engage in criminal activity in comparable rates, particularly when it comes to drugs and things of that nature. Right? So to address the community concerns, California could reform its current law that pertains to racial profiling in at least 3 key principal ways. One is to modernize our definition of profiling so that it not only accounts for race, but other identity characteristics that can serve as the bases of discrimination. Our federal Department of Justice recently issued guidelines in December of 2014, which expanded the definition of profiling for federal law enforcement agents to include not only race, but other identity characteristics such as national origin, religion, sexual orientation, gender, and things of that nature. The Presidential Task Force on 21st Century Policing recently issued recommendations just this month, which echoed that approach. Currently, California is far outdated when it comes to that. Right now, our current law on the books has been in place since 2000. It only talks about race. That's insufficient for protection for folks of a wide variety of identity characteristics. So that's one key reform that could be imposed in that area. Second, we need to collect information on routine law enforcement community interactions so we can get a better understanding of the problem. Right now, all we have is anecdotal accounts and narratives which give us a better understanding of the lived experiences of people of color and other identity characteristics that are, as in their view, are inappropriately targeted. However, we don't have a thorough understanding of how these interactions take place, and it would be very important to solving any problem is to have the facts, right? The devil's always in the details, so to say, right? Right now, all we have is anecdotal accounts. And third, an important aspect of reforming our racial profiling law would be to create an advisory board that can look at the data, policies, and practices of departments and collectively come together to develop solutions. And that would be a multi-stakeholder advisory board. Second, in regards to the issue of use of force, I'd like to read a brief statement from that was recently made by FBI Director James Comey. He made this in a speech not too long ago. How can we address concerns about use of force? How can we address concerns about officer-involved shootings if we do not have a reliable grasp of the demographics and circumstances of those incidents? We simply must improve the way we collect and analyze data to see the true nature of what's happening in all of our communities. Currently in California, law enforcement agencies are required to report information to the Department of Justice on all deaths in custody, which includes deaths during arrest, right? So uses of force that result in arrest. However, there's a wide variety of harms that fall short of death that are not being captured by law enforcement agencies. To add, once the Department of Justice receives the current information, which in itself is insufficient, it doesn't routinely report it on a regular basis. The last report by the Department of Justice was issued in the mid-2000s, and it only provided 4 pages of summary information about thousands of deaths. I believe it's over 4,500 over the course of numerous years. So to improve our understanding of use of force issues and the problems that we see playing out in our streets and in the news and that affect all our communities, a key policy solution is to reform the current framework in place by doing 2 things. One, expanding the requirement from uses of force that result in death to serious uses of force that fall short of death. And 2, to require the Attorney General to regularly analyze and report the information that it receives so we can start taking steps to move forward. And with that being said, I'd like to strongly urge the committee and the legislature more broadly to consider these policy reforms. We've been working closely with Dr. Weber on 2 bills that address all of these issues as well as more. And they're AB 953, which is the racial profiling measure, and second, AB 619, which addresses uses of force. Thank you very much.
Thank you.